Good afternoon, everyone. How's everyone doing today? Good. Wow, what a turnout. This is a great, great turnout. So please grab some food, even if you're just here for any other reason besides what matters to me and we want you to make sure you're well fed. There are some seats up here, a few, so feel free to come up. It's not class, so no one will call on you. Please come up to the front. I'm very grateful for such an extraordinary turnout for our third What Matters to Me and Why of the Year, featuring my dear friend and colleague, Professor Diane Winston from the Annenberg School of Communication and Journalism. But before we begin, I just want to shamelessly plug a few upcoming events that you might be interested in. The first is an event called Living Through Suffering, featuring Tibetan Buddhist master Khenpo Sodargme. That's an event that's going to be happening this Sunday, November 9th at 2 p.m. at the Ronald Tudor Campus Center Ballroom. He's going to be talking about suffering, something that makes us all human, ties us together, and something that I think all of us want to understand in our lives and transcend to the extent that's possible. So if you have any interest in Tibetan Buddhism or are wrestling with the question of suffering in your life, please attend. We have an event on 11/11. That's, I believe, next Tuesday at 8 p.m. It's called The Benefits of Mindfulness. It's going to be at the Ronald Tudor Campus Center 227. This event is part of our Mindful USC initiative, which has received an overwhelmingly positive response. And this is the student component of the initiative. So it's a student-driven event. They're really going to be focusing on mindfulness in terms of stress reduction and how do we think about mindfulness in our highly technologized era. And we also have an event called Mindful Christianity that's happening on November 12th at 5 p.m. at the Kilgore Chapel at the University Religious Center. That's an event really focused on the contemplative aspects of Christianity. And finally, you may know that last year USC acquired the Pacific Asia Museum in Pasadena, PAM for short. And at the Pacific Asia Museum in Pasadena from November 5th to November 9th, there's going to be a group of Tibetan Buddhist monks from India who are creating a sand mandala and then will destroy it at the very end as part of their ritual offering. If you go anytime between the 5th and the 9th, you'll be able to see the mandala as a work in process. And if you go on the 9th itself, you'll actually be able to see the completion of it and the destruction of it. So it's an amazing experience. I encourage you all to go and just to check out the Pacific Asia Museum anyway. It's got a great collection, and it's now a USC entity, and I believe students can go and get in for free with their USC ID cards. So all that being said, I'm very grateful for, like I said, an extraordinary turnout. This is our third talk of the month. Next month we'll end our semester with Urvashi Mitra from the Viterbi School of Engineering, so I encourage you all to come for that as well. As you know, this is a series that happens on many campuses around the country. We're in our 14th year, I believe, and what makes us so special is that we do it every month as opposed to every semester. And we also have students that sit on a committee that nominate the speakers, students who produce the event, and students who introduce the speakers as well. So it gives me great pleasure today to introduce our student who will introduce our speaker. He is a doctoral candidate at the Annenberg School. Please join me in welcoming Addison Shockley.
Hello, everybody. Like Varun said, I'm Addison. I'm a PhD student at Annenberg, and I'm pleased to introduce Diane Winston. In 2012, I decided to come to USC to study rhetoric, communication, religion, and values. And I called Diane because she has common interests, and I talked with her about that decision, and she helped convince me to come here, and I'm happy that I did. The first semester I got here, I met with her, and shortly thereafter decided to enroll in a course with her, a directed readings, an independent study about evangelicalism in the 20th century, American history, the rise of the religious right, and in addition to that, participated in her upper level undergraduate course. I don't know, some of you probably have taken it, Religion, Media, and Hollywood, which is a great class. So I kind of observed her teaching, and I got to experience being mentored by her. And ever since, I've continued to meet with her and talk about common interests and get advice from her as I work through my degree program. Over the years, I've come to appreciate many things about Diane, including her professionalism, her style of mentorship and teaching, and her personal warmth and welcoming personality. So I've thought of 3 symbols that capture for me, in my imagination, Diane Winston. And I'll share those with you. Number 1, a smiley face with a lightning bolt by it, and I'll explain that later. Number 2, the word wow in big bold letters. And number 3, a gift box. So I'll start with the smiley face with the lightning bolt by it. What does this mean? So for me, that means that Diane balances, and I've seen her do this, she really balances tenderness on the one hand and severity on the other when she's mentoring. So I've got stories about that, but grace and truth. In teaching, she balances, and I've seen this, she creates a classroom environment that is both relaxing and rigorous. So it's really kind of a great space. And in terms of feedback, I've seen her do this better than any professor I've ever known. In the way she praises students, she balances praise with critique, compliment and critique. I want to tell you why she wows me. Professionally, just her background is incredible. As a nationally Pulitzer Prize nominated journalist, a seasoned journalist for many years, she worked at places like the Baltimore Sun and other newspapers in Dallas. And she got her master's degree in journalism from Columbia. She got a master's in theological studies from Harvard Divinity School, and then went on to Princeton to do a PhD in religion. She has published 5 academic books dealing in different ways with religion, media, and politics. And she, in just so many ways, is just an incredible scholar, journalist, and she still does journalism today at her website, transmissions.org, and other places. And she's leading students at Annenberg right now through courses in religion and how it relates to journalism, foreign policy, and politics. So thirdly, why a gift box? Diane, for me, is a gift box. She's been a gift box to me in so many ways. She's given me tons of tips, gobs of advice, and tons of suggestions, people to meet, books to read. She's given me lots of books, conferences to attend. She's super helpful, hospitable, welcoming, and generous with her time, with her money, and she's just plain cool. So it's clear to me that we have a generous, down-to-earth human being to speak with us today. It's clear that she's incredibly successful and productive as a journalist, scholar, and national authority on religion and the media. So we have much we can learn from her. So it's with pleasure, therefore, that I now introduce to you my friend and mentor, Diane Winston.
Thank you, Varun, and thank you, Addison. I love the smiley face with the lightning bolt. I think I'm going to get an emoji custom made with that on it. And thank you all for coming out today. Can everybody hear me? Yeah? Mark Twain was an inveterate cusser, and his wife hated the habit. One day while shaving, Twain cut himself, and he let loose a string of expletives. His wife stood nearby listening, silently, patiently, and when he had finished, she turned to him and calmly repeated his litany word for word. "My dear," he said to her, "you've got the words, but you don't know the rhythm." I feel for Mrs. Twain because I have lots of words, but I sometimes wonder about the rhythm. The rhythm is the enticing melody that pulls you in, invites you in, and asks you to see my truth from my eyes. I know my rhythm hasn't always synced with other people's. I was that kid, you know that kid, the kid who lived in books, the kid who read French novels at summer camp, the kid who dreamed of being a nun when she was Jewish. So I, though, like some of you, I imagine, was doing the reading, was doing that thinking, was imagining that life because I had two pressing questions. Why am I here, and what do I do about it? We can spend time in the Q&A discussing the various paths I've taken to find those answers, at least some of them. And I will try to be as frank as possible, but from now I want to focus on only one, and that's the path that took me to journalism. I was one of the lucky ones. After graduate school, I found my dream job. And since I graduated from Harvard Divinity School, it wasn't on Wall Street, and it wasn't with a Fortune 500 company. Rather, I got a job with what was then called Clergy and Laity Concerned, which was grassroots organizing, trying to stop war and end poverty. I'd expected my coworkers to be living saints, exemplars of the loving service and spiritual discipline that I'd studied in divinity school. Instead, I found men and women as interested in sex, power, and success as anyone I'd expect to meet in corporate America. After less than a year, I concluded that this really was not what I wanted in my life, and I needed something different. So while looking around for what next, a friend who published a small magazine asked me to write a piece about Jewish involvement in the anti-war movement. In other words, what did Jews say and do about the Vietnam War? Although I'd never written professionally, and I hadn't been a journalist since high school, and I wasn't being paid anything, I jumped at the assignment. I spent hours in archives. I interviewed dozens of rabbis and community leaders. I took scads of notes. And when I sat down to write on a warm summer night in 1978, I plastered my bedroom walls with those notes. I can still see surrounding my desk the yellow pages of paper. Rows and rows, stacks and stacks of yellow pages. As I organized the story and started to write, I fell away. That is, the me who thinks and does and reacts stopped, and all there was left was the writing. If any of you have had this kind of experience, you know it's very hard to explain what egolessness is like, since by definition it is a state devoid of duality and hence observation. So although the fact that I remember anything about that long ago summer night, the fact that I remember the room and the feeling in the paper confirms a very magnitude, even though I am unable to tell you exactly what happened, much less why or how it occurred. But I can tell you it changed my life. I decided I was going to be a writer. Naive as I was, I assumed that experience of oneness would happen to me every time I wrote. I understood that feeling of oneness to be an affirmation of a life dedicated to writing, especially about writing about justice. So I was not much older than many of you when I thought I had it all figured out. I'd do for others through my writing, and my writing would do for me. Not just as a way to earn a living, but as a way to experience on a regular basis that oneness, that which led me to feel something beyond myself. It didn't quite work out that way. After studying journalism, I found a newspaper job writing about religion. My plan was to document unsung heroes, struggles for social change, and now and again an inspiring sermon. I did do some of that, but I also had to write about the very things I disliked most about American journalism: its relentless focus on conflict and sensationalism. So I'd write a story about a death row chaplain, and it might appear on the front of the newspaper's second section. But my gotcha story about a philandering pastor made page 1. But even more disheartening than writing about feckless rabbis and philandering priests, and something I could not gripe about with my coworkers was that experience of oneness never occurred again. Many other good things did happen. Through my stories, I was able to enter lives radically different than my own and to experience worlds alien to my own. In plain language, I, a secular Jew from New York, got to know and understand, and in some cases even love, Southern fundamentalists. Given that most of us rarely venture outside the comfortable walls of our own realities, this was an unexpected gift. And I suppose my work did make a difference, providing information, offering alternatives, and lifting up untold stories. But never again did I feel that sense of oneness with the work. 10 years passed, and I yearned to tell longer stories, dig deeper into deeper truths, and be free from editors who demanded that I ask questions that weren't my own. How do you feel now that your father has died of AIDS? What do you think about your priest being a pedophile? What is it like to have a mother who embezzled $100,000 from the church? I returned to school this time, coming out as a scholar. I thought I'd put journalism behind me. But when I accepted the position at USC, it was clear that my questions had caught up with me. Why am I here? What should I do? And what am I doing for other people? One of the things I do is teach religion coverage. I assume that when I get students, they've already learned how to cover conflict and scandal in their other courses. My job is to help them to think about what journalism could be and how to get it there. To that end, there are 3 axioms that I try to communicate to students. The first is the importance of context. Our country's growing financial inequality did not start with Barack Obama. It's a product of a long history of legislation, regulation, and both private and public persuasion. Similarly, the conflict in the Middle East, specifically the growth of ISIS, the civil war in Syria, the conflicts with Iran, did not begin on September 11th, 2001. There's a long history dating back 100 years, and even before then, that helps explain the current mess. Yet most of our journalism focuses solely on the present moment, ignoring that a long trail of social, economic, and political decisions have gotten us to where we are today. That's a problem if journalism is to help develop an informed citizenry. So I ask my students, what can we do differently? The second thing I'm interested in is the decentering of conflict. Our society, and therefore our news media, accepts conflict and violence as a norm. It's so deep in our expectations that it's hard to see this is a choice we make. We could easily see peace, collaboration, and cooperation as the way things should be, as our norm. What would journalism look like if we shifted our ideological set point from conflict to cooperation? It's not about ignoring facts. If a conflict occurs, you don't sugarcoat it or ignore it. But what would stories look like if the conflict was the aberration rather than the collaboration was strange? What would it look like if we were attuned to getting along and working together rather than always fighting? Third thing I would like to tell my students is there's no substitute for reality. It's a challenge to get students out to interview people in person. I mean, really, who wants to drive around LA? And why talk to someone when it's so much easier to interview them on email or talk by telephone? But looking into someone's eyes, responding to them in the physicality of the moment can be illuminating and even transformative in ways that a virtual interview can never be. Part of the joy of being a journalist is meeting others and interacting others and being invited to their world. And you don't get invited into someone's world when you're communicating on Facebook. So to circle back to the beginning, hopefully some of my rhythm has beguiled you too. Hopefully, some of you also wonder, why am I here and what do I do? And hopefully, some of you also feel the question that Martin Luther King so poignantly posed to us, which is, what do I do for others? That most urgent question, said King, that confronts us every day. What do I do for others? You don't need to become a journalist or a community activist to answer that question. In my academic courses at Annenberg and the School of Religion, I assume that the future engineers and business people who I teach also ask those questions. And I hope those classes do something to help with the answers. What matters to me are the small steps that improve the world for my students, my children, and the generations to come. And it would also be nice to have one more experience of that oneness. Thank you. We have about 20 more minutes together, and if anyone has any questions or comments, I'd love to hear from you.
Is it on? Okay. So I've actually communicated with you through email, Professor, about your religion course. But can you talk about more about this oneness, more in specifics? Like, I'm still not understanding. I came kind of late into your...
I said early on that in the first assignment I ever had, in the process of writing it, I had an experience of oneness, which to me meant a falling away of all the ego stuff that normally gets us from one place to another, and a feeling of becoming. In other words, I felt as if I was the process. I was so immersed in the writing that the writing was me. I think this is what people talk about when they talk about having experiences in meditation or in prayer or in contemplation where they do not feel attached to their ego, but they feel part of something larger than themselves. Does that answer your question? Most people, though, I don't know how many other people find it in writing. I'd be curious.
Hi. According to a lot of anthropological studies, so much of our human civilization has survived because of cooperation and empathy within us humans. But why do you think our viewpoint, especially in news and media, is conflict rather than cooperation?
The question is, why do I think the news media privileges conflict over cooperation? I think that, especially in the American news media, we have the feeling that to get people's attention, you have to confront them with something that's going to be shocking or surprising or horrific. And conflict seems to be one way of doing it. If there's a fight going on, you want to know who won. Or if one person is attacking, one country is attacking another, you want to know what happens. So I think conflict becomes a convenient way to give readers what they want. I also think you could make the argument that, conflict may be part of our humanity, that, as far back as you want to go, people had fights and had conflict. So it's not something that's extrinsic to us and totally put on us, but people also had collaboration and cooperation. So why privilege one over the other?
Sorry.
I was just curious if you think that the religious coverage in the U.S. has improved since 10 years ago, and what are the greatest needs for people in terms of understanding religion today?
I I wish that religion was taught in secondary schools. Not theology, but world religions, because to understand life in the 21st century, you need to understand the fundamentals of most religions. It's not indoctrinating people, it's educating people. So, you know, we tend to talk about Islam or Christianity as if they're monoliths, but within each religion there are so many different traditions, and there are so many ways that they interact with each other that we're unaware of. And what's happening in the Middle East now between the Sunni and the Shia just is a little glimpse of that, because within Sunni and Shia there are all kinds of divisions that can be collaborating or fighting with one another. So I think we need to be better educated. I think religion coverage is probably better today than it was 10 years ago because there's so much more of it. One thing that's happened with the disruption of the traditional newspaper industry is there's so much more online that you can read. So if you think the coverage in the Los Angeles Times isn't really going deep enough, there are 20 other places you can learn about the same story. Or if you think you're not being told the truth about the Catholic Church in the Boston Globe, you can Google and find other places where you can see what's going on. So I think that the technological disruption really has been a boon for specialized coverage because there's so much more of it.
You mentioned loving a group that is often despised by others, fundamentalists. Can you talk about what about them you found attractive or lovable? I'm going to distinguish now between leaders of the movement and everyday people who I met. Because many of the leaders of that religious movement, like other religious movement, were as interested in politics and power as any secular politician. But everyday people who I met, I mean, they were folks who were trying to live the right way, and who looked at the Bible and felt that it had deep relevance to their lives, and that they were faithfully trying to follow what it said. And I think what's interesting to me is a lot of issues in fundamentalism and a lot of the fights within fundamentalism come down to this question of biblical revelation. And is the truth unchanging and eternal, or does the truth change over time? And it's not just a problem for fundamentalists, it's a problem for Jews or Catholics or Muslims or any group of people who has a revealed truth and is not sure what that exactly means. And so the fundamentalists who I met who were trying to answer those questions for themselves, and who really struggled with how do I feel about abortion, or how do I feel about gay people, or how do I feel about, you know, male headship over women, were like anyone else who was trying to make sense and ask themselves, you know, why am I here and what am I doing? They may have come up with very different answers than I did, but I could appreciate the fact that they struggled too.
I had a question about media itself, actually. One of the most interesting religious stories that came about, particularly with religious writing, was how Reza Aslan was critiqued by a journalist on how dare he, as a Muslim, write about Christ. Do you think that media professionals ourselves need to be educated about religion, and who can write religion and who has access to writing about religion?
Of course. I wouldn't have a job otherwise. Yes. I mean, just as I think every child should take a course in religion along with calculus and European history, I think journalists who are going to cover international politics or domestic politics or almost anything need to know about religion. I think you cannot be an informed citizen of the 21st century and be ignorant about religion. Whether or not you are personally religious doesn't make a difference. Religion is part of, our world, and it means it's very deeply implicated in the politics and culture of many societies. So definitely I feel like religion should be something all journalists cover. And when I offer my class at Annenberg, it's not about teaching religion and, going to a local church or synagogue. We go out to cover stories around the world. Last year we went to Mumbai because we were covering the run-up to the election there. And as some of you probably know, one of the issues was that one of the candidates was, Modi, was had previously, when he was in charge of a state called Gujarat, been leader at the time of a terrible massacre of Hindus, and so many of Muslims rather, and so many Muslims were concerned that if he won the election, it would be bad for them. Whereas many Hindus felt that that was in the past, and Modi represented a change in policy, and he represented a new type of economics, and so he would be good, and that religious problem was in the past. And so that was one of the things we wanted to look at, and one of the reasons we went to Mumbai when we did. But you can't cover that without having some idea of the history of Hindus and Muslims in India and what has been the experience of both those groups. And so, I wouldn't just set my students down in Mumbai and tell them start reporting. We spend time learning about that history, about the economics, about how religion fits into social issues and social problems. So it's easier to see that when you get a free trip to India. But I think it's true no matter what you're doing.
Diane, as a journalist, what do you think is you've been studying religion, what do you think is the future of religion in our world? Where do you think it's going?
I don't think it's going anywhere. I think that people always are going to be asking themselves, why am I here? What is my purpose? How do I find meaning? And religion or spirituality or something beyond oneself is going to be part of the answer in that. I think that we're seeing a lot of changes in the institutional religions and the forms they've had in modernity. And so whether or not the Catholic Church or, conservative Judaism looks the same in 100 years, that may change, because the institutional structures that made sense for 200 years may no longer make sense. And so things will look different. But I don't think the Catholic Church is going anywhere. I don't think Judaism is going anywhere. I think those things may look different, and I think there may be other alternatives that people find compelling that also enter the marketplace of religious ideas. So as long as people think beyond what they're going to buy next, or believe that there's meaning outside of, the consumer sphere, I think there's going to be a need and a desire for something that helps them think about the questions beyond themselves.
So I have one more question. So, so you are a journalist, and so can you talk about maybe what has been your purpose and why it's been your purpose throughout your time as a journalist?
Well, I don't work as a journalist very much anymore. I publish a website called Religion Dispatches, and if all of you went home and looked at it, it would be great for our metrics. So please Google it and take a look at what we do. And I'd love if you became a reader, and if you wanted to, a writer or a donor. But I believe that this is just for me. I think different journalists have different purposes. Some journalists want to, tell truth to power. Some journalists want to get close to presidents. Some journalists want to explain how the banking system works. For me, I wanted to be a journalist because I wanted to tell stories about unsung heroes, about movements for social change, and about ideas that could bring people hope. I know it sounds very corny, but to me, those kinds of stories were the reasons why I became a journalist.
And hope in what,
Hope that they could make a difference in their world. So many people today think they can't make a difference, which is why probably only 45% of citizens voted yesterday in the elections, 45% of Californians. Being a good journalist to me would be writing stories that would get people out to vote, that would make them think, I have a stake in this and I can make a difference. Or giving people hope to write an initiative, to think about ways to, fight the drought, or to make whatever social or political changes that would make a healthier, happier, more equitable world for people. I mean, I think journalists should. I hesitate because if they heard me say this over at Annenberg, they would not be happy with me. So even though we're being videotaped, I'll pretend there's a cone of silence. I think journalism at its very best can inspire people to work for change. And that's why I think being a journalist is important.
Do you think that Westerners now or in the future can grasp the mystical experience that leaves theology behind? That is, if you're locked to the image of God in a culture where science determines your perceptions of reality, how can we experience that feeling of rapture, that feeling that you described when you're writing?
How can...
You experience the feeling
of
rapture, just like you feel when you're writing?
How can other people?
Yeah, other people, or how can, the common folk? What would be your advice to them? So if someone who can't find their bliss or their rapture, what advice would you give them?
If I could really answer that well, I could start my own religion and get really rich and give it all away. I think that people within religious traditions would tell you that there are practices that can help you to do that, whether it's meditating or contemplating or praying, and that's one way to do it. I think that from what I've read, there are other people who find a wholeness. I wouldn't call it rapture, I would call it more of a wholeness or a oneness, because they begin doing something that takes them outside of themselves. I mean, sometimes athletes, I hear, have that experience when they're playing and their playing takes them out of themselves because all they're doing is playing. I think musicians sometimes have that experience when they're so deep into the music that they're at one with the music. So I think that there are other pathways to have it, but I think it's such an individual experience that, it happens when you throw yourself into something so deeply. I suppose you could have it cooking if you threw yourself into that, or studying. Yeah?
Hi, I just wanted to make a comment. I'm an accounting student, so I actually found it really interesting when you talked about this oneness, because I actually felt that kind of oneness back in high school when I was solving this math problem. And it was really interesting because you're talking about writing and kind of getting into it, but I really felt this oneness when I was solving this math problem and just process of developing a formula and developing a solution. So I just wanted to make that comment. And a question for you is because, well, you mentioned, I forget the context of where you mentioned it, but you mentioned how you want to see professionals of other disciplines, especially because I'm a business major, that they should go on to make a difference or, to help others. What does that really look like to you, especially in today's context, that accountants or business people would, instead of getting into conflict or try to take advantage of each other, they would really collaborate or help each other?
Well, different people find different paths, and just as you said that you've had that experience of oneness solving a math problem, which is a perfect example of how each of us has our different path. I think that there are examples of businessmen who have become philanthropists and who are giving money away to different projects to make the world a better place. I think there are philanthropists who are interested in setting up different kinds of programs which educate people, which provide medical care for people. I think it's what Martin Luther King said in that quote, the most urgent question facing all of us is, what have I done for someone else, or what have I done for others? And I think if that's in the forefront of your mind, what you do can take various forms. And it can be sharing, more equitably with your employees, or it could be donating millions to starving children. And it doesn't have to be grand gestures. It could be small things. I was talking to someone who I met through some physical therapy. So it's a physical therapist who's obviously not a wildly successful businessman, and he told me that he has a goal of delivering 500 meals to the homeless for this year. And that to me is a great example of someone who is thinking about that urgent question of, what do I do for others?
I'm just wondering, kind of piggybacking off what you were just saying, do you think it's still respectable if people go into careers or put most of their energy into making money and then donating that money to these kind of volunteer services, or is it more respectable? Do you find it more respectable when people do go into careers that are directed toward that sort of volunteer way of living, if that makes sense?
I think you have to figure out what makes sense for you, and I can't do that for someone else. So some people may want to go into careers where they make a lot of money and they feel good about that and they decide that they want to do something for others. And some people may go into a career where they're organizing in this, being a grassroots organizer. I don't think there's a right or wrong. I think it's, which feels like the path you should be on.
So can you talk about the difference between bias and immersing yourself and becoming oneness with the stories you've done, and how that differs from bias and some of the challenges you've faced as a journalist?
I'm not sure I understand the question.
So, okay, you've talked about through your career, you kind of become immersed in stories to where you become, there's this oneness.
No. I said that one time when I was writing one story, I experienced a oneness with the writing. I never experienced that again, and it's not becoming one with the people I'm writing about. It was becoming one with the process of what I was doing.
Oh, so you just become so deep into it, or how does that differ from?
It happened once.
Okay, but how?
Once.
But that one time that happened, I'm saying, how can you? Because what it sounds like to me, maybe I'm not understanding it. It sounds kind of biased, and I know that journalists we hate we want to stay away from being biased. We want to be grounded.
It had nothing to do with bias. It had to do with, if I was a football player and I told you that when I was making a touchdown, I became so much part of the running and the ball that I forgot for a second, oh, I'm a football player and I'm doing great, but I'm just in the action at the time. It's not about bias or anything. It's about a state of pure
activity. So it's not about bias somehow injects a human feeling into it when this is sort of beyond that.
But isn't there a human feeling in trying to strive for social change and give hope to people, or like, do you understand you don't understand what I'm coming from? Well, it's just like you're striving for social change in some of the stories that you've done, but have you ever faced any challenges of people critiquing your work as being biased?
No, because that's a great question. No, because even though I have my own agenda, I did my best as a journalist not to have that influence my writing. So I might go out and look to cover a death row chaplain, and that would be my choice, but the story would never make it past my editors if it was a puff piece or a piece of propaganda. So part of the way I could get the stories I wanted to get in the paper was by playing by the rules, which meant finding interesting stories about people who were doing newsworthy things. If I had let my own desire of changing the world dictate my stories, they wouldn't have been stories, they would have been propaganda and never had been published. So, in other words, all journalists have an agenda, whether the agenda is to get on page 1 or to write about big politicians or to make a lot of money. People have agendas. The trick about succeeding is to play the game the correct way and not let the agenda rule you. But to do your job correctly and to hope that your agenda can be met as a side effect of the correct doing of one's job.
We're out of time, so I just wanted to say a few words in closing. Let's give thanks to Diane. And then I'm going to present on behalf of the What Matters to Me Why Student Committee this journal to you as a gift of thanks.
Thank you.
So that you can journal about what matters to you more. And so with that, thank you, Diane.
Thank you.
And one last announcement. For those of you who are part of the residence halls here, your discussion will take place just outside. I know there's another group that's getting into this space. So please just exit here and you can meet your peers there for the discussion to follow this. And thank you again for coming, and please join us for our last session next month with Urvashi Mitra. Fight on.